Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted her white lab coat as she walked through the pristine corridors of the Galactic Medical Research Station orbiting Kepler 442b. Her soft brown eyes reflected the gentle nature that had made her famous throughout the galaxy. Known as the Angel of the Outer Rim, she had spent the last 15 years developing cures for diseases that plagued dozens of alien species. The station buzzed with activity as researchers from across the galaxy worked together. Elena smiled warmly at a young Zephyrian intern whose blue-scaled hands trembled as he carried a tray of samples. The reptilian being had been struggling with the complex human equipment for weeks. "Take your time, Kess," Elena said softly, her voice carrying the same warmth that had comforted millions during her medical broadcasts. "The samples aren't going anywhere." Kess's large amber eyes brightened. "Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. Your patience means everything to us newcomers." Elena had always been this way. Born on a peaceful agricultural colony, she had grown up believing that kindness could solve any problem. Her parents were farmers who had never seen violence beyond the occasional pest control. When Elena showed exceptional intelligence in biochemistry, they were proud but worried about her leaving their quiet world. "The universe is vast and sometimes cruel," her mother had warned. "But remember, mija, gentleness is not weakness. It takes strength to remain kind when others choose hatred." Those words had guided Elena through medical school on Earth, through her residency on Mars, and eventually to her current position as the head of xenobiology research. She had developed treatments for the crystalline plague that had been killing the silicon-based Verthari for centuries. Her work on neural regeneration had saved thousands of cerebral-class androids from permanent shutdown. Every species she encountered seemed to benefit from her gentle approach and innovative mind. The Galactic Council had even awarded her the Universal Peace Prize 3 years running. During her acceptance speech, Elena had spoken about the power of compassion in scientific discovery. "When we approach other beings with open hearts and open minds," she had said, "we don't just heal bodies. We heal the divisions between worlds." The audience of delegates from hundreds of species had given her a standing ovation that lasted 20 minutes. News feeds across the galaxy had broadcast her words, and Elena had become a symbol of everything good about interspecies cooperation. But Elena's peaceful world was about to shatter. Commander Thrak of the Dominion fleet materialized on the station's main viewing screen during Elena's afternoon tea break. The massive insectoid's forearms gestured menacingly as his compound eyes glowed with malicious intent. Behind him, Elena could see the dark hulls of 1,000 warships blocking out the stars. "Attention, pathetic creatures of the so-called Galactic Alliance." Thrak's voice buzzed through the station's speakers like angry hornets. "I am Commander Thrak of the Hegemony Dominion. Your little experiment in peace ends today." Elena set down her teacup with shaking hands. Around her, researchers from dozens of species froze in terror. The Hegemony Dominion was a nightmare from the outer darkness, a collection of the most violent species in known space. They had been quiet for decades, building their strength in the void between galaxies. "We have observed your weakness," Thrak continued. "Your soft sciences, your pathetic attempts at cooperation, your ridiculous belief that different species can coexist peacefully. We have come to correct this delusion." Station Commander Relic, a dignified Centaurian with silver fur, stepped forward. "Commander Thrak, this is a medical research station. We have no weapons, no military value. Our work here benefits all species, including your own." Thrak's laugh sounded like metal scraping against stone. "Precisely why you must be destroyed. Your healing makes species weak. Your cooperation prevents the strong from ruling as they should. The galaxy needs culling, and we shall provide it." Elena watched in horror as Thrak's ships began moving into attack formation. The massive dreadnoughts bristled with weapons that could crack planets. But what terrified her most was the look in Thrak's compound eyes. She had seen hatred before, but this was different. This was the calculated coldness of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "You have 1 standard hour to evacuate non-essential personnel," Thrak announced. "Then we begin our cleansing of this sector. Any ship that attempts to flee will be destroyed as an example to others." The screen went dark, leaving the station in stunned silence. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening in a room she had forgotten existed. For 15 years, she had dedicated her life to healing and helping. She had chosen to see the best in every species she encountered. She had built her entire identity around the belief that gentleness could overcome any obstacle. But now, as she looked around at her terrified colleagues, Elena realized that some problems couldn't be solved with kindness. Some beings didn't respond to compassion. Some situations required a different kind of strength. Dr. Vasquez, Kes whispered, his scales now pale with fear. What do we do? Elena stood slowly, her mind already beginning to work in ways it hadn't for years. During her time on Earth, she had studied more than just medicine. Her doctoral dissertation had included extensive research into biological warfare, toxicology, and combat biochemistry. She had chosen to focus on healing, but she remembered every detail of how to harm. We evacuate the civilians, Elena said quietly, her voice still gentle but with an edge that made several researchers step back. All non-essential personnel need to get to the escape pods immediately. But Dr. Vasquez, Relic protested, you're essential personnel. Your research is irreplaceable. Elena walked to her laboratory, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. Commander Relic, please ensure that all research data is backed up to the quantum drives, and gather any volunteers who want to stay behind. Stay behind for what? Elena paused at her laboratory door. When she turned back, her colleagues barely recognized the woman who had been serving them tea an hour earlier. Her brown eyes still held warmth, but underneath that warmth was something harder than diamond and twice as sharp. To remind the hegemony Dominion why humans don't start wars, Elena said softly, we finish them. As she disappeared into her laboratory, Elena began pulling up files she hadn't accessed in 15 years. Her gentle hands moved across the computer interface with practiced precision, calling up formulas and compounds that could kill in ways the hegemony had never imagined. The angel of the outer rim was gone. What emerged from that laboratory would be something else entirely. Elena's laboratory had transformed overnight. Where once stood orderly shelves of healing compounds and regenerative serums, now sprawled a chaotic workshop of death. She worked with the same methodical precision that had saved millions of lives. But now that precision served a darker purpose. Her fingers danced across multiple keyboards as she accessed databases that most scientists didn't even know existed. The human military archives, classified for over a century, contained research that the early Earth governments had deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. Elena's security clearance granted for her medical research into combating biological weapons now served an entirely different function. Fascinating, she murmured, pulling up a file labeled Project Chimera, Xenobiological Warfare Applications. The document detailed theoretical weapons designed specifically for non-human physiology. It had been theoretical because humans had never encountered alien life when it was written. Now Elena had 15 years of hands-on experience with dozens of alien biologies. She began with the hegemony's most numerous species, the Vorthak. These insectoid warriors were Thrak's primary shock troops, known for their chitinous armor and rapid reproduction. Elena studied their biological data, information she had gathered while treating Vorthak refugees from their own empire's brutal policies. Hemolymph composition, chitinous matrix density, respiratory spherical placement, she muttered, making notes. The Vorthak breathed through small openings along their thorax, similar to Earth insects but scaled up dramatically. Elena smiled coldly as she began synthesizing a compound that would crystallize upon contact with their specific hemolymph chemistry. The station shuddered as Thrak's ships moved closer. Through her laboratory window, Elena could see the massive dreadnoughts positioning themselves like predators surrounding wounded prey, but she didn't feel like prey anymore. She felt like something the predators had never encountered before. Kes appeared in her doorway, his scales now a sickly green color. Dr. Vasquez, most of the civilian staff have evacuated, but about 30 researchers have volunteered to stay. Commander Relic wants to know what you need from us. Elena looked up from her work and Kes involuntarily stepped backward. The gentle doctor he had known was still there, but something else lurked behind her eyes now. Something that remembered humanity's bloody climb to the top of Earth's food chain. I need you to gather all the atmospheric processors from the agricultural sections, Elena said, and bring me every sample of hegemony biology we have in storage. Blood samples, tissue cultures, everything. But those samples are for medical research. The treaties specifically prohibit their use for... The treaties, Elena interrupted quietly, are void the moment they decided to commit genocide against a medical station. She turned back to her work. The hegemony wants to see what humanity looks like when we stop being gentle. Let's show them. Cass hurried away and Elena continued her work. She pulled up files on Krillian physiology next. These energy-based beings were incorporeal, but maintained physical form through complex quantum fields. Elena had spent 2 years studying their unique biology after a solar flare had disrupted their quantum matrices, essentially giving an entire colony cancer. She had cured them then, developing a stabilization therapy that had become standard treatment across the galaxy. Now she reversed her own work, creating a compound that would destabilize their quantum fields catastrophically. Instead of healing cancer, she was essentially giving them a weaponized version of it. The third major hegemony species presented a different challenge. The Nethys were silicon-based crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic resonance. Elena had always found them beautiful, like living gemstones that sang in frequencies that human ears couldn't detect. She had developed hearing aids that allowed humans to appreciate their music, and translation devices that let other species communicate with them. Now, she designed a sonic weapon that would use their own harmonic frequencies against them. Instead of music, she would give them noise that would shatter their crystalline matrices from the inside out. Station Commander Relic entered her laboratory as Elena finished the preliminary designs for all 3 bioweapons. The silver-furred Centaurian looked around at her work with a mixture of awe and horror. "Elena," he said, using her first name for the first time in years, "what have you become?" Elena paused in her work, considering the question. When she answered, her voice carried the same gentleness it always had, but underneath ran a current of something far more dangerous. "I've become what humans have always been, Relic. We're not naturally peaceful, we're naturally protective." She gestured toward the hegemony fleet visible through the window. "For 15 years I've had the luxury of healing instead of harming. But my species didn't become apex predators on Earth by being kind to things that threatened our families." Relic's ears flattened against his skull. "Your families?" "Elena, we're just colleagues." "No," Elena said firmly. "You're my family." "Kess is my family. Every researcher on this station who chose to stay and help is my family, and now something is threatening my family." She turned back to her work. "Humans have a saying, Relic. Violence is not the answer. But sometimes it's the question, and the answer is yes." The Centaurian commander watched as Elena began loading her bioweapons into aerosol dispensers. "How do you plan to deploy these? The hegemony ships are too far away for any atmospheric weapons." Elena smiled, and for the first time since Thrax's ultimatum, it was a genuinely warm expression. "Relic, you're thinking like a soldier. I'm thinking like a doctor." She held up a small container filled with what looked like ordinary medical supplies. "These compounds don't need to reach their ships. They just need to reach the hegemony forces when they board our station." "When they board?" "Elena, you're planning to let them capture us?" "I'm planning to let them try." Elena's eyes sparkled with an intelligence that had spent 15 years healing but had never forgotten how to harm. "The hegemony sees gentleness as weakness. They think that because we've chosen peace, we've forgotten war. They're about to learn that humans don't forget anything. We just choose when to remember." She began explaining her plan, and as she spoke, Relic understood why humans had become the galaxy's premier medical researchers. They didn't just understand how biology worked. They understood how it could be broken. And they understood it better than any other species because they had spent millennia breaking each other before they learned to heal. Outside the laboratory window, Thrax's ships continued their approach. The commander had no idea that his ultimatum had awakened something in humanity that the galaxy had never seen. Something that remembered the ancient human truth. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that looks gentle until you threaten what it loves. Elena Vasquez was about to remind the universe that humans hadn't conquered Earth through kindness. They had conquered it through superior violence and then chosen to be kind afterward. Now that choice was being revoked. The first hegemony boarding pods struck the station's hull like metal meteors, their impact reverberating through the corridors. Elena stood in the medical bay, no longer wearing her pristine white coat. Instead, she had donned a simple black outfit that wouldn't show bloodstains. Her hands remained steady as she made final adjustments to the atmospheric recycling system. "Remember," she told the 30 volunteers who had chosen to stay, "let them take the station. Let them think they've won. Every species here has natural immunities to their own biological weapons, so you'll be safe from what I've prepared." But stay away from hegemony forces once the real fighting begins. Kes clutched a modified medical scanner, his scales shifting through nervous color patterns. Dr. Vasquez, are you certain this will work? They have thousands of soldiers. Elena checked the timer on her wrist device. Kes, do you know what the mortality rate was for human children on Earth before we developed modern medicine? The young Zephyrian shook his head. 60% died before their 5th birthday. Disease, predators, accidents, starvation. For millions of years, only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable humans survived to reproduce. Elena's voice carried a teaching tone, as if she were conducting a lecture. Other species developed in safer environments. The Vorthak evolved on a world with abundant food and few predators. The Krillians achieved sentience as pure energy beings who never faced physical threats. The Nethys grew up in crystal caves where their biggest danger was occasional seismic activity. The station shuddered again as more boarding pods attached themselves to the hull. But humans, Elena continued, humans evolved in hell. We survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless predators that were bigger, stronger, and faster than us. We survived because we became the most dangerous thing our planet had ever produced, not through claws or teeth or venom, but through our minds. The sound of cutting tools echoed through the corridors as hegemony forces began breaching the station's outer hull. Elena activated her comlink to address the entire station. Attention, hegemony forces. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of xenobiology research. I'm ordering all remaining personnel to surrender immediately. Do not resist the boarding parties. Commander Thrak's buzzing laughter filled the speakers. Finally, the soft humans show sense. Perhaps your deaths will be quicker if you cooperate. We're not resisting, Elena replied calmly. We're scientists, not soldiers. We'll surrender peacefully and hope you'll honor the Geneva Conventions regarding prisoners of war. Your human conventions mean nothing to the hegemony, Thrak snarled. But your cooperation is noted. We may allow some of you to live as examples. Elena muted her comlink and smiled at her volunteers. Did you hear that, everyone? They think we're cooperating out of fear. Her expression grew colder. They have no idea that we're cooperating because we want them inside our home. The first hegemony soldiers burst through the medical bay doors 15 minutes later. Elena raised her hands in surrender, watching as a squad of Vorthak warriors swept into the room with their weapons raised. Their leader, a massive insectoid with battle scars across his chitinous armor, approached her with clicking mandibles. You are the human doctor, he stated rather than asked. You will be taken to Commander Thrak for interrogation. Of course, Elena said meekly. I'll cooperate fully. I just want this to end peacefully. The Vorthak soldier struck her across the face with the back of his armored hand, sending her sprawling to the floor. There will be no peace for your species, soft skin. Only subjugation or death. Elena touched her bleeding lip and looked up at the soldier with what appeared to be fear. But inside she was counting. 30 seconds since they had entered the station. The aerosol compounds she had loaded into the atmospheric system would be circulating through their respiratory spiracles by now. Please, she whispered, allowing her voice to tremble convincingly. I have information that might be valuable to Commander Thrak. Research data, weapons specifications from other Alliance worlds. The Vorthak leader's compound eyes gleamed with interest. You would betray your own species? I would do anything to survive. Elena lied smoothly. 1 minute, 15 seconds. The crystallization process would be beginning in their hemolymph systems now, though they wouldn't feel symptoms for several more minutes. Throughout the station, similar scenes played out as hegemony forces took control of every section. Krillian energy beings phased through walls to secure critical systems, their quantum matrices stable and confident. Nethys crystalline warriors sang in harmonic frequencies that shattered glass and made the station's metal framework ring like a bell. They had no idea that the air they were breathing, the surfaces they were touching, and the very environment they had invaded was carefully designed to kill them in the most efficient ways possible. Elena was dragged to the station's command center, where Commander Thrak waited with a contingent of his elite guards. The massive insectoid commander loomed over her, his forearms gesturing dismissively. So this is the famous Angel of the Outer Rim, Thrak buzzed mockingly. You look even weaker than I expected. Your reputation for healing has made you soft. Please, Commander, Elena said, maintaining her facade of terrified cooperation. I can be useful to you. I know the defensive capabilities of Alliance worlds, the locations of research facilities, the... Thrak backhanded her with enough force to shatter a normal human skull. Elena rolled with the blow, having anticipated it, but allowed herself to cry out in apparent pain. You will tell me everything I want to know, Thrak snarled. But first, you will watch as I broadcast the destruction of this station to every Alliance world. They will see what happens to those who oppose the hegemony. Elena wiped blood from her mouth and checked her chronometer. 3 minutes, 47 seconds. The first Vorthak soldiers should be experiencing respiratory distress right about now. As if summoned by her thoughts, a Vorthak warrior stumbled into the command center, clutching his throat. Commander, he wheezed, something's wrong. My squad is having trouble breathing. Thrak turned to the soldier with annoyance. Explain. The warrior tried to speak, but instead began coughing up a crystalline substance that Elena recognized as his own solidified hemolymph. His compound eyes widened in terror as he realized he was essentially coughing up his own blood, now turned to razor-sharp crystals. Atmospheric contamination, Elena said helpfully, dropping her frightened act entirely. Specifically designed to interact with Vorthak respiratory and circulatory systems. The compound bonds with the proteins in your hemolymph and crystallizes them. Quite painful, I imagine, and 100% fatal within 6 minutes of exposure. Thrak spun to face her, his own breathing suddenly feeling labored. What have you done? Elena stood up slowly, no longer bothering to appear weak or frightened. I've reminded you that humans didn't become the galaxy's premier xenobiologists by accident, Commander. We understand alien biology better than the aliens themselves because we've spent centuries learning how to fix it. Her voice grew colder, which means we also know exactly how to break it. Throughout the station, hegemony forces began experiencing the effects of Elena's biological warfare. Krillian energy beings found their quantum matrices destabilizing as harmonic disruptors embedded in the station's walls activated. Nethys crystalline warriors screamed in frequencies that shattered their own molecular structures as sonic weapons turned their communication abilities against them. Elena had turned the entire medical station into a death trap, specifically designed for the 3 primary hegemony species, and they had walked right into it because they had mistaken human gentleness for human weakness. You see, Commander, Elena said as Thrak began showing symptoms of respiratory distress, you made one critical error in your intelligence gathering. You assumed that because we choose peace we don't understand war, but humans are the most successful predators our planet ever produced. We just learned to direct that predatory instinct toward healing instead of hunting. Thrak raised his weapon with a shaking arm, but Elena stepped closer instead of backing away. Until something threatens our family, she continued, then we remember what we really are. Commander Thrak's weapon trembled in his grasp as crystallized hemolymph began forming visible deposits along his chitinous armor. Around the command center, his elite guards were experiencing similar symptoms, their confident postures deteriorating into desperate attempts to breathe. Elena watched with clinical detachment as the biological weapons did their work. She had designed each compound to be as efficient as possible, while ensuring the subjects remained conscious long enough to understand what was happening to them. It wasn't cruelty, she told herself. It was education. How? Thrak wheezed, his compound eyes focusing on Elena with difficulty. How did you prepare for our specific biologies? We told no one of our attack plans. Elena walked to the command center's main console, stepping over a Vorthak guard who had collapsed. You didn't need to tell anyone, Commander. You've been sending refugees to Alliance medical stations for decades. Dissidents, political prisoners, beings your empire considered defective for wanting peace instead of conquest. She activated the station's internal communication system, her voice now carrying to every surviving being on the station. I've treated thousands of hegemony refugees over the years. Each medical examination, each genetic scan, each biological sample was cataloged and stored. You gave me 15 years to study your species' weaknesses while I healed the ones you had broken. Thrak tried to raise his weapon again, but his motor functions were failing as the crystallization spread through his circulatory system. You used medical knowledge as a weapon. That's prohibited by galactic law. So is genocide, Elena replied calmly. So is attacking a medical research station. So is threatening to exterminate entire species because you consider cooperation to be weakness. She leaned closer to the failing commander. The difference is that I'm protecting innocents. You were planning to murder them. Throughout the station, the sounds of hegemony forces dying filled the corridors, but Elena felt no satisfaction, no joy in their suffering. She felt the same clinical detachment she experienced when removing a cancer from a patient. Sometimes, to save healthy tissue, you had to cut out the diseased parts. Kessa's voice crackled over the intercom. Dr. Vasquez, the hegemony fleet is moving closer. I think they're preparing to bombard the station. Elena checked her chronometer. The bioweapons had been active for 7 minutes now, which meant any hegemony forces aboard the station should be experiencing terminal organ failure. But the ships outside remained a threat. Relic, she called over the comm system. Are you monitoring hegemony communications? Yes, the Centaurian commander replied. They're receiving distress calls from the boarding parties, but they can't understand what's happening. They think the station has some kind of automated defense system. Elena smiled grimly. Good. That gives us a few more minutes. She turned back to Thrak, who was now struggling to remain standing. Commander, I need you to do something for me. Thrak's mandibles clicked weakly. Go. To hell. I need you to contact your fleet and order them to land additional troops, Elena said conversationally. Tell them that the station's defenses are neutralized, but you need reinforcements to process all the prisoners. Never. Thrak gasped. Elena sighed and walked to a medical kit mounted on the wall. She removed a small injector filled with a clear liquid. This is a respiratory stimulant that will counteract the crystallization in your hemolymph for approximately 10 minutes. Long enough for you to make that call. Thrak's compound eyes followed the injector with desperate hope. You would. Heal me after what we planned. I'm offering you a choice, Elena said. Make the call and buy your soldiers a quick death from the bioweapons already aboard the station. Refuse and I'll let you die slowly while your fleet bombards us from a distance. Either way, your invasion fails, but this way fewer beings have to suffer. It was a lie, of course. Elena had no intention of letting any more hegemony forces board the station. But Thrak didn't know that. The insectoid commander considered for a moment, then nodded weakly. Elena administered the injection, and within seconds, Thrak's breathing improved dramatically. The crystallization didn't reverse, but its progress slowed significantly. Clever, Thrak admitted, his voice stronger now. You offer mercy to gain compliance. Very human. No, Elena corrected. Very much the old me. The new me would have let you suffocate. She handed him a communication device. Make the call. Thrak activated his comm link to the fleet. This is Commander Thrak. The station is secured, but we need additional troops for prisoner processing. Send landing parties from all available ships. The response came immediately. Acknowledged, Commander. All available troops are being prepared for deployment. Estimated arrival in 20 minutes. Elena took back the communication device and smiled at Thrak. Thank you for your cooperation. The additional troops will overwhelm your bioweapons, Thrak pointed out. Fresh air from their ships will dilute your atmospheric contamination. Will it? Elena asked innocently. You know, Commander, that's assuming my bioweapons only work through atmospheric exposure. Thrak's expression shifted to confusion, then growing horror as Elena's implications became clear. You see, Elena continued, I didn't just contaminate the air. I contaminated every surface on this station. The floors, the walls, the door handles, the control panels, anything a hegemony soldier might touch during a boarding action. She gestured around the command center. Your troops have been absorbing contact poisons through their skin from the moment they set foot on my station. Elena walked to the viewing window and looked out at the hegemony fleet. Hundreds of ships hung in space, their crews preparing for what they thought would be a simple prisoner transfer. The respiratory compounds were just the delivery system, she explained. They got your soldiers' attention while the real weapons soaked through their integument. Topical absorption toxins specifically designed for each species' cellular structure. Thrak tried to stand but collapsed as his legs gave out. The respiratory stimulant was wearing off, but more importantly, he was beginning to understand the true scope of Elena's trap. The troops landing now will experience the same fate, Elena said matter-of-factly. And when they fail to report in, your fleet will send more. Each wave will add to the contamination, as their ship's atmospheric systems circulate the compounds I've embedded in their equipment. You're describing a plague weapon, Thrak whispered. I'm describing a very selective medical intervention, Elena corrected. These compounds only affect hegemony species. They're completely harmless to Alliance biology. I designed them that way because, unlike you, I don't believe in genocide. She turned back to the dying commander. Your empire sent you here to demonstrate hegemony strength by slaughtering peaceful researchers. Instead, you're about to demonstrate why humans became the galaxy's premier xenobiologists. We understand life so well that we can target death with surgical precision. Through the viewing window, Elena could see the first wave of hegemony landing craft approaching the station. Soon they would dock and their crews would board, unknowingly carrying her biological weapons back to their own ships. This is impossible, Thrak gasped. No single being could design weapons this sophisticated. You would need teams of specialists, military bioweapons divisions, years of development time. Elena sat down in the command chair and looked at the approaching ships with the same expression she had once worn while watching her medical research save lives. Commander, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. I didn't design these weapons in the last few hours. I've known about your empire for 15 years. Every time I treated one of your refugees, every time I healed someone your society had damaged, I learned more about your biology. Her voice carried a note of sadness. I hoped I would never need to use that knowledge, but I always knew I might have to. She looked down at Thrak as his life ebbed away. Humans prepare for war even when we pray for peace, especially when we pray for peace, because we know that the only way to protect the gentle things in the universe is to be prepared to become very, very dangerous when someone threatens them. The first landing craft docked with the station, and Elena began the final phase of her plan. The second wave of hegemony troops moved through the station with growing confusion. Their comlinks crackled with unanswered calls to the first boarding parties, and the corridors they expected to find filled with prisoners instead contained only the bodies of their own soldiers. Elena watched from the command centers, security feeds as Acrylian energy being attempted to phase through a wall, only to scream in harmonic frequencies as its quantum matrix destabilized mid-transition. The creature solidified halfway through the metal bulkhead, its form flickering between states before finally dispersing into random energy. Fascinating, she murmured, making notes on her tablet. The quantum disruption field is more effective than I calculated. The subjects lose molecular coherence entirely, rather than simply reverting to base matter. Commander Thrak's body lay motionless at her feet, but Elena barely noticed. She was focused on the tactical displays showing troop movements throughout the station. Each red dot represented a hegemony soldier, and she watched with clinical interest as those dots steadily winked out. Kess's voice came over the intercom, trembling with fear and awe. Dr. Vasquez, the second wave is down to 30% strength, but there are more ships approaching. The entire hegemony fleet is sending troops now. Excellent, Elena replied. The more ships that dock with us, the faster the contamination spreads through their fleet. She activated the station's external cameras and zoomed in on the hegemony dreadnoughts. Through the transparent sections of their hulls, she could see crew members moving about their duties, unaware that their landing parties were carrying death back to them. Relic, Elena called over the comm. Are you monitoring the fleet's internal communications? Yes, the Centaurian replied, his voice shaken. They're reporting equipment malfunctions on the ships that have docked with us. Atmospheric systems failing. Crew members reporting illness. They think it's a technical problem. Elena nodded, satisfied. The contact poisons were designed to remain active on surfaces for hours, and any equipment or personnel that returned from the station would carry the compounds back to their ships. The hegemony's own logistics network was becoming her delivery system. A new voice crackled over the hegemony communication channels, speaking in the buzzing tones of a high-ranking Vorthak officer. This is Admiral Zeeth aboard the flagship Decimator. All ships report status immediately. Elena listened with interest as the reports came in. Ships that had sent troops to the station were reporting widespread system failures and crew casualties. Ships that had not yet participated in the boarding action remained fully operational, but Admiral Zeeth was beginning to piece together the pattern. Recall all landing parties immediately, Zeeth ordered. No further contact with the station until we understand what's happening. Elena activated the station's external communication array. Admiral Zeeth, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez aboard the research station. I believe we need to talk. The communication channel fell silent for several seconds before Zeeth responded. You are the human doctor. What have you done to my forces? I've given them exactly what they came here to deliver. Elena replied calmly. Death to a medical research station. The only difference is that they're receiving it instead of delivering it. Impossible. No single being could what, Admiral? Could develop targeted biological weapons in a few hours? Could turn an entire space station into a death trap? Could outthink the mighty hegemony military? Elena's voice carried a note of dark amusement. You're right. No single being could do all of that in a few hours. But I've had 15 years to prepare for this day. Through the security feeds, Elena watched as the few surviving hegemony troops aboard the station attempted to reach their landing craft. Most collapsed before making it halfway, their biological systems shutting down as the weapons she had designed did their work. You see, Admiral, your empire has a fundamental misunderstanding about humans, Elena continued. You see our medical research, our humanitarian aid, our peaceful diplomatic efforts, and you assume we're weak. You assume that because we choose healing over harming, we've forgotten how to harm. She pulled up a holographic display showing the molecular structure of her bioweapons, broadcasting it to the hegemony fleet. But humans didn't become apex predators through kindness, Admiral. We became apex predators through intelligence, adaptability, and an absolutely ruthless approach to eliminating threats to our survival. Admiral Zyth's voice carried a note of growing desperation. What do you want? Terms for surrender? Elena laughed, and the sound sent chills through every being listening to the communication channel. It wasn't the laugh of someone enjoying cruelty. It was the laugh of someone who had just realized how thoroughly their opponents had underestimated them. Surrender? Elena repeated. Admiral, you seem to misunderstand the situation. I'm not negotiating. I'm educating. Your fleet came here to demonstrate hegemony superiority by slaughtering peaceful researchers. Instead, you're about to become an object lesson in why humans don't start wars. She activated another display, this one showing the contamination spread throughout the hegemony fleet. Red zones indicated ships where her bioweapons had taken hold. Yellow zones showed ships with possible exposure, and green zones represented uncontaminated vessels. Your own logistics network has become my delivery system, Elena explained, with the same tone she had once used to teach medical students. Every piece of equipment returned from this station, every soldier who made contact with contaminated surfaces, every atmospheric system that processed air from my facility, has spread my compounds. Throughout your fleet, the red zones on the display were expanding in real time as the contamination spread from ship to ship through normal crew, rotations and equipment transfers. You wanted to see what humans look like when we stop being gentle, Elena said. Congratulations, Admiral. You're the first beings in galactic history to receive that education and live long enough to understand it. Admiral Zyth's response came through gritted mandibles. You're describing genocide. The very thing you accused us of planning. No, Elena corrected firmly. I'm describing surgical removal of a malignant threat. My weapons only affect the 3 primary hegemony species that chose to participate in this attack. They're completely harmless to the hundreds of other species in your empire who were conscripted into your military against their will. She activated another display showing the detailed biological specificity of her weapons. In fact, Admiral, I've designed these compounds to be self-limiting. They'll break down naturally within 72 hours, leaving no long-term environmental contamination. Very different from the planetary sterilization weapons your fleet carries. The communication channel filled with the sounds of chaos as reports flooded in from across the hegemony fleet. Ships were reporting massive casualties among Vorthak, Krillian, and Nethys crew members, while other species remained unaffected. How is this possible? Scythe demanded. This level of biological warfare requires resources we don't have access to. Military research facilities, weapons laboratories, armies of specialists. Elena stood and walked to the viewing window, looking out at the dying hegemony fleet with the same expression she had once worn, while watching her patients recover from terminal illnesses. Admiral, let me tell you something about human medical research. Every disease we cure, every biological process we understand, every xenobiological interaction we study teaches us something new about how life works. Her voice grew colder. And anything that understands how life works also understands how life stops working. She gestured toward her laboratory. This research station contains 15 years of accumulated knowledge about alien biology. Genetic sequences, cellular structures, biochemical pathways, immunological responses. I know more about your species' biology than your own doctors do. Because I've spent my career fixing what your society breaks. Elena activated one final display, showing the projected timeline for the contamination spread through the entire hegemony fleet. At the current rate, 70% of their military force would be dead within 6 hours. Your empire made one critical error in its intelligence gathering, Elena said. You assumed that because humans choose to heal, we don't understand how to harm. But every human doctor learns anatomy by studying corpses, Admiral. We learn to save lives by first understanding exactly how lives end. The dying hegemony fleet hung in space around the research station, their crews finally beginning to understand that they hadn't attacked a soft target full of defenseless civilians. They had attacked the most dangerous predator their galaxy had ever produced, disguised as an angel of mercy. And now they were learning why humans had become the apex species on every world they touched. The silence that followed Elena's explanation stretched across the communication channels like a funeral shroud. Throughout the hegemony fleet, Admiral Zyth watched his tactical displays paint an increasingly desperate picture. Ship after ship reported casualties mounting among his 3 primary species, while auxiliary races remained mysteriously unaffected. Dr. Vasquez, Zyth's voice had lost its commanding tone, replaced by something approaching respect mixed with terror. You're offering to spare the conscripted species in our fleet. Why? Elena remained at the viewing window, watching as emergency lights began flickering across the hegemony vessels. Because they're victims, Admiral, not villains. Your empire conquers worlds and forces their populations into military service. The Altarians in your engineering corps, the Zalan technicians maintaining your weapon systems, the Huron pilots flying your support craft, they didn't choose this war. She activated another display showing detailed personnel records that made Zyth's compound eyes widen in shock. Yes, Admiral, I know exactly who serves aboard your ships and in what capacity. 15 years of treating refugees gives you extensive intelligence on how your empire operates. Through the security feeds, Elena could see that the station was now clear of hegemony forces. Her volunteers were beginning to emerge from their hiding places, moving carefully through corridors littered with the bodies of would-be conquerors. Kess, Elena called over the intercom, begin documentation protocols. I want full biological scans of the deceased, tissue samples for analysis, and detailed recordings of the weapon's effects. This information may prove valuable for future defensive applications. Dr. Vasquez, Kess replied, his voice stronger now. Some of the auxiliary species aboard the hegemony ships are requesting permission to evacuate. They're afraid the contamination will spread to them. Elena considered this for a moment. Grant them safe passage. Any non-hegemony species that wants to leave those ships can dock with our station. We'll provide them with transport to Alliance territory. Admiral Zyth's voice crackled over the comm with disbelief. You would trust enemy personnel aboard your station, after what you've just demonstrated? They're not my enemies, Admiral. They're your slaves. Elena's voice carried the same gentle tone that had once comforted millions, but now it seemed more threatening than any battle cry. The difference between us is that I can distinguish between those who choose evil and those who are forced to serve it. Throughout the hegemony fleet, auxiliary species began abandoning ship in droves. Elena watched as small craft detached from the dying dreadnoughts, their crews fleeing toward the research station. These beings had served the hegemony out of necessity, not conviction, and now they were being offered something their empire had never given them: a choice. You realize, Zyth said, that without their support personnel, our remaining ships will be unable to function. Our life support systems, our navigation computers, our weapons arrays, they all depend on conscripted technicians. Yes, Elena replied simply. I designed it that way. Admiral Zyth fell silent as the implications became clear. Elena hadn't just created weapons to kill hegemony forces. She had engineered a complete collapse of their military infrastructure by targeting only the species that had chosen conquest while sparing those forced into service. This is psychological warfare, Zyth realized. You're not just killing us. You're dismantling our entire social structure. Elena finally turned away from the viewing window to face the communication screen. Her expression remained gentle, but her eyes held depths that Zyth was only beginning to understand. Admiral, your empire is built on the premise that might makes right, that the strong should dominate the weak, that cooperation is weakness and conquest is strength. She walked closer to the screen. But you made one critical error in that philosophy. You assumed that because humans choose cooperation, we must be weak. The refugee ships were docking with the station now, and Elena could see the faces of beings who had served the hegemony against their will. Altarians with their distinctive blue skin, Xelon insectoids whose hive-mind nature made them excellent technicians, Huron avians whose natural flying abilities made them superior pilots. Humans didn't conquer Earth through individual strength, Admiral. We conquered it through cooperative intelligence. We became apex predators not by being the biggest or strongest, but by being the smartest and most adaptable. Elena's voice grew colder. And the most dangerous thing about smart, adaptable predators is that they can choose to appear harmless right up until the moment they strike. She activated a new display showing the hegemony fleet's current status. Over 60% of their ships were now reporting critical system failures as conscripted personnel abandoned their posts and primary species succumbed to Elena's bioweapons. Your empire taught the galaxy to fear hegemony strength, Elena continued. Today I'm teaching the galaxy something new. I'm teaching them that human mercy is a choice, not a limitation, and choices can be revoked. Admiral Zaith's flagship was now one of the few vessels still maintaining basic operations, though reports indicated that even his command crew was beginning to show symptoms of exposure. What happens now? Zith asked, his voice barely a whisper. Do you plan to hunt down the survivors? Pursue our fleeing ships across the galaxy? Elena shook her head. No, Admiral. That would make me like you, and I refuse to become the thing I'm fighting against. She gestured toward the refugee ships still arriving at the station. I'm giving every non-hegemony being in your fleet the chance to choose their own path. They can return to their homeworlds, seek asylum in Alliance territory, or even try to build something better from the wreckage of your empire. She paused, studying Zith's image on the screen. As for your surviving forces, you have a choice too. You can continue believing that conquest and domination are the natural order of things, in which case you'll spend the rest of your shortened lives looking over your shoulders, wondering when the next human doctor might decide that your species poses a threat to galactic peace. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. Or you can learn from this experience. You can realize that the reason humans became the galaxy's premier medical researchers isn't because we're naturally peaceful. It's because we're naturally dangerous and we chose to direct that danger toward healing instead of harming. The communication channel filled with the sounds of systems failing across the hegemony fleet. Ships that had once seemed invincible were now drifting hulks, their crews either dead or fled. The choice is yours, Admiral, Elena said. But choose quickly. My bioweapons are designed to be self-limiting, but the social and political changes you've triggered by attacking a medical station will last much longer. She gestured toward the refugee ships. These beings you forced into service are now free to tell the galaxy exactly what life under hegemony rule was really like. They're going to spread stories about your empire that no amount of military intimidation can suppress. Elena smiled, and for the first time since the attack began, it was genuinely warm. You came here to demonstrate hegemony's strength by destroying a symbol of cooperation and healing. Instead, you've created thousands of witnesses who will spend the rest of their lives testifying that cooperation and healing are stronger than conquest and domination. Admiral, Scythe's response was cut short as his ship's communication systems finally failed. Elena watched as the last of the hegemony dreadnoughts went dark, their crews either dead or fled. Their empire's military might reduce to drifting scrap metal. But Elena felt no satisfaction in their defeat. She felt only the weight of choices made and prices paid. She had proven that humans could be more dangerous than any species in the galaxy imagined. Now she had to live with what that proof had cost her, and what it might cost the galaxy if the wrong beings learned the wrong lessons from today's events. 3 months after the hegemony fleet died in the void around the research station, Elena stood in her rebuilt laboratory, wearing a white coat once again. But the woman inside that coat had changed in ways that couldn't be undone. Her hands remained steady as she worked. Her voice still carried the same gentle tone that had comforted millions, but her eyes held depths that spoke of choices no healer should ever have to make. The station bustled with activity as researchers from across the galaxy returned to their work. But now they shared their corridors with former hegemony auxiliary personnel who had chosen to stay and contribute to the research programs. Altarian engineers worked alongside human technicians to improve the station's defensive systems. Ceylon computational specialists helped develop new medical algorithms. Huron pilots provided security patrols that no hostile force would ever again mistake for weakness. Kess entered Elena's laboratory, carrying a datapad filled with reports. His scales had returned to their normal healthy green, but like everyone who had witnessed Elena's transformation, he approached her with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Dr. Vasquez," he said formally, "the Galactic Council has released their official report on the hegemony incident." Elena looked up from her current project, a new regenerative therapy for species affected by war trauma. "What's their verdict, Kess?" "They've classified your actions as justified defensive measures taken under extreme circumstances." Kess read from the pad. "The bioweapons have been deemed legal under the doctrine of proportional response to genocidal threats." Elena nodded without surprise. The council had spent months investigating the incident, interviewing survivors, analyzing the biological weapons, and debating the implications of what had happened. Their conclusion had been foregone from the moment the refugee testimonies began. "There's more," Kess continued. "The former hegemony territories have been placed under Alliance protection. The surviving auxiliary species are being offered citizenship in their choice of Alliance worlds and—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable with the next part. "And?" Elena prompted gently. "And you've been nominated for another Universal Peace Prize. For demonstrating that the protection of innocence sometimes requires the application of superior force, and for proving that true strength lies in choosing when to use one's capabilities, rather than in the capabilities themselves." Elena set down her research tools and walked to the window where she had first watched Thrax's fleet approach. Now the void outside showed only the gentle lights of Alliance patrol ships and the occasional research vessel arriving with new projects. "Will you accept the nomination?" Kess asked. "No," Elena said quietly. "What I did was necessary, but it wasn't peace. It was the opposite of peace, applied precisely enough to protect peace." She turned back to her work. "The galaxy doesn't need to celebrate what I became that day, Kess. It needs to understand why I became it." The young Zephyrian shifted uncomfortably. "The refugee testimonies have changed how the galaxy views both humans and the hegemony. Support for the Empire has collapsed even in their remaining territories. Some xenobiologists are calling your actions the most significant development in interspecies relations since first contact." Elena's expression grew thoughtful. "They're not wrong, but not for the reasons they think." She activated a holographic display showing galactic diplomatic activity over the past 3 months. Trade agreements, defense pacts, and research collaborations had increased exponentially. As species that had once lived in fear of hegemony, retaliation suddenly found themselves free to pursue their own interests. "The important thing isn't that I proved humans can be dangerous," Elena explained. "The important thing is that I proved we choose not to be. Every species in the galaxy now knows that if humans wanted to conquer them, we could do it in ways they couldn't detect until it was too late." She gestured toward the display. "But instead of conquest, we offer cooperation. Instead of domination, we offer partnership. The fact that we could choose differently makes our choice to be peaceful meaningful in ways it never was before." Kess nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "You're saying that peace without the capability for war is just helplessness. But peace with the capability for war is actually peace." "Exactly," Elena said. "The hegemony could never understand why species would choose cooperation over conquest because they had never encountered a species that was capable of conquest but chose cooperation. Instead, a soft chime indicated an incoming message. Elena activated her communication system to find Commander Relic's silver-furred face filling the screen. "Elena," he said, using her first name as he had ever since the incident. "We have a situation developing in the Tau Ceti system. A new aggressive species has emerged from the outer rim, and they're demanding tribute from the colony worlds." Elena felt something shift inside her chest. The same sensation she had experienced when Thrak first appeared on their screens. But this time she recognized it immediately. The gentle healer was stepping aside to make room for something harder and more necessary. "What do we know about their biology?" Elena asked, her voice already taking on the clinical tone that had become legend across the galaxy. "Preliminary scans suggest they're silicon-based, with distributed nervous systems and regenerative capabilities that make them extremely difficult to kill through conventional means," Relic reported. "The colony worlds are requesting Alliance protection, but our fleets are still months away." Elena was already moving toward her laboratory's secure storage unit, where samples and data from hundreds of species were carefully cataloged and preserved. Have they made any demands regarding medical facilities or research stations? Not yet, Relic replied. But their rhetoric suggests they view scientific cooperation as a form of weakness, similar to the hegemony's philosophy. Elena's hands paused over the storage unit's controls. For a moment she thought about the woman she had been before Thrax's ultimatum. The gentle doctor who had believed that kindness could solve any problem. That woman was still inside her, still believed in healing and helping and the fundamental goodness of most beings in the universe. But she was no longer naive about what it took to protect that goodness. Kess, Elena said, please contact the xenobiology departments at the other Alliance research stations. Tell them I'm requesting all available data on silicon-based distributed intelligent species, and ask them to prepare quarantine protocols for highly aggressive organisms. Dr. Vasquez, Kess said carefully, are you planning to develop another bioweapon? Elena looked out at the stars where somewhere in the Tau Ceti system, peaceful colonists were facing the same choice the research station had faced 3 months ago. Surrender to evil or fight back against impossible odds. I'm planning to give them the same choice I gave the hegemony, Elena said quietly. Learn to coexist peacefully with the rest of the galaxy, or discover why humans became the most successful species in known space. She activated her workstation and began pulling up files that most beings would never see, knowledge that could heal or harm depending on how it was applied. The Angel of the Outer Rim was preparing to remind the galaxy once again that angels could be warriors when the innocent needed protection. You know, Elena said, almost to herself, my mother told me once that gentleness isn't weakness. She said it takes strength to remain kind when others choose hatred. Elena's reflection in the darkened window showed a woman who had learned to be both gentle and strong, kind and dangerous, a healer and a protector. She was right, Elena continued. But what she didn't tell me was that sometimes, protecting gentleness requires us to become something that isn't gentle at all. As Elena began her work, the galaxy held its breath. The creatures threatening Tau Ceti had no idea they were about to encounter the most dangerous predator in known space, disguised as an angel of mercy. They thought they were facing weak, cooperative beings who would surrender rather than fight. They were about to learn the difference between choosing peace and being incapable of war. And like the hegemony before them, they would discover that the most terrifying thing in the universe isn't a monster that was born evil. It's an angel who chooses to become monstrous to protect what it loves.